everyone, welcome back to Let's Talk. My name is John, and today here on the channel, we are going to be talking about the brand new Psycho 4K box set that just came out from Arrow Video. But before we dive into that, let's talk a little bit about the Psycho franchise as a whole. The original Psycho film was released in 1960, directed by one of the greatest, if not the greatest director of all time, Alfred Hitchcock, the king of the thrillers, and Psycho was very much ahead of its time, did a lot of firsts. First of all, we get Janet Leigh in the lead role, or so we think. A young woman who just robbed her boss of about $40,000 and now she's on the run. She decides to stop at the Bates Motel, being run by Norman Bates, played by the great Anthony Perkins in an amazing lead role. And Anthony Perkins holds this entire franchise together. He is the glue that makes it work. Now, a lot of people might not talk about the sequels because Psycho is such a classic. So much has been said about Psycho, the inspirations had on the horror genre in general, that it's really hard for me to add to that. But I do want to say that Anthony Perkins is just so good in this lead role. He's just so charming. Like, you really understand why people kind of get fixated on him, why they're just drawn to him and why they trust him. And that trust is kind of what leads to Janet Leigh's death. You know, he invites her over for some sandwiches and milk, but she gets in the shower, and obviously the shower scene is the most famous scene in the Psycho franchise. And we kill her off about halfway through the movie, and the movie makes a hard left turn as we dive into now what is making Norman Bates tick. And we find out by the end of the movie, what's making him tick is that he's killed his mother, and he has the dead body just living upstairs in that big house with him. And it turns out he's got split personality disorder, and he's pretending to be his mother and going around and killing people dressed as her. And he doesn't realize he's doing it. And they make sure to explain this all to us at the very end of this movie, which I know is a very divisive scene. Some people love it because, you know, it gives you all that exposition and tells you exactly what the hell is going on. And I think this scene made more sense back in 1961 than it does today in 2023. I think we kind of look back at it as a negative, but you got to realize back in 1961, this was all new to people. And Alfred Hitchcock was selling this movie as the scariest film ever at the time. You know, the trailer didn't give too much information away. I think explaining it at the time was the best option, but I could see why in 2023 when you look at it, it's like, I don't need to be beat over the head with this. I know exactly what the hell is going on, but I try and look at it from a different perspective. And then in 1983, 22 years later, Robert Franklin directed the sequel to Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. And this one was actually written by Tom Holland, who would end up directing the first Child's Play movies. I think this was actually the first screenplay he ever wrote. You also had Jerry Goldsmith doing the score. Anthony Perkins was back in the lead role as Norman Bates. He just got released from the mental institution. He's been cleared to be sane. It turns out he was found not guilty because of insanity. So 22 years later, they said, hey, you know what? He's not insane anymore. His lawyer is played by the sleaziest of all sleazebags, Robert Loggia, and I absolutely love him in this movie. And he decides, you know what? He's going back to the hotel. He's going to start his life over again. And he ends up getting a job, as basically a fry cook's assistant, and things seem to be going well. But unfortunately, some people have a big problem with him, and this kind of sets him down a very dark path again.
It's starting again.
Psycho 2 could have easily just been a regular old-fashioned slasher film from the 1980s, but it's very much an homage to what Alfred Hitchcock did with the first Psycho, and it's labeled a psychological slasher, and that's exactly the best way to describe it, because it does feel very much like the sequel to Psycho. They didn't go into the slasher genre where we're killing off people and slasher tropes. No, we're really diving into Anthony Perkins and Norman Bates' mind here, trying to understand what's making him tick. And I do enjoy the story and plot of this movie, and it's also so well shot and so well scored. It feels like more of a highbrow horror film, especially for 1983, where they could have just very much went the route of Friday the 13th and what would become more of it like the Slumber Party Massacre. But no, they actually tried to tell a really good story, and I think Psycho 2, at this point, it is a cult favorite because it's a very well-made movie. It has no business being this good. Unfortunately, it's the sequel to Psycho, one of the greatest films ever made, that it gets very much overlooked. But it did pretty good financially, and 3 years later, in 1986, they released Psycho 3. And this time, Anthony Perkins is in the director's chair. And this movie very much is of the 1980s. I'm going to quote David, aka Shamrock Balls, on what he describes this movie as, because he's a big fan of the Psycho franchise, and he says that Psycho 3 is sleazy, and he could not be more right. This movie definitely feels like a product of the 1980s. It's got the electric score, just sleazebags like Duke, the one character who's got a great line in this movie. He's like, when he tries to rape a nun, well, she just got basically fired from being a nun. He tries tries to rape her, and he says, instead of going, you could have been coming. So, he's just a real asshole. He gets a job working at the motel after the events of Psycho 2, because this does take place only 1 month after Psycho 2, even though it's filmed 3 years later, and it's a big drop-off as far as the technicals go, in my opinion. This really does feel more like a low-budget 1980s horror film, leading into all the 1980s tropes, but it does have some really cool aspects to it. First of all, we get to see the motel actually filled up with people. We get to see these people killed off in some violent, gruesome ways. We get all the sex, drugs, and rock and roll you would expect of the 1980s, and Anthony Perkins does a really good job in this movie as well. Like I said, he's the glue that holds this franchise together, but I would say that his performance in here is actually a slight drop-off from his performance in Psycho 2, and I think that's because he had the director's duties as well, so he's probably worrying about what everybody else is doing, and he's not able to concentrate on his performance as much. But the movie is still so good that you're going to really get into it and enjoy it if you're a fan of 1980s slasher films. If you're not, then the mileage for this movie may vary for you, but for me, I really did enjoy this movie. And then unfortunately in 1990 we got Psycho 4, which is by far the worst in the franchise. It's a TV movie, so it really didn't have much hope for it. It's called Psycho 4 The Beginning. It is actually surprising for a TV movie though. It's actually pretty good. It's not the worst TV movie I've ever seen. It's actually structured non-linearly, and the whole story takes place while a radio broadcast is going on one night, diving into killers who kill their mothers. And one of the people who calls in, going by a fake name of Ed, is Anthony Perkins' Norman Bates. He's telling the story to CCH Pounder, who many people might recognize from a lot of FX shows, including The Shield or Sons of Anarchy. And she's a great, very underrated actress, and she hosts a radio show, and she's talking to a psychiatrist about people who kill their mothers. And Ed, who's actually Norman Bates, he's using a fake name, calls in, and he's telling the story about how he killed his mother and how he has to kill again. He somehow got released from the institution after the events of Psycho 3, which I'm not going to spoil for you guys because I feel like a lot of people haven't seen the Psycho franchise. But after the events of Psycho 3, somehow, some miraculous way, he gets out of the institution again.
Good God, son. You'll never get out again.
Wrong! And a woman fell for him while he was in the institution. She just loves mom killers, and she decides, even though Norman Bates told her numerous times not to get pregnant because he doesn't want the genetics to pass down to the kid, completely understandable since this is clearly genetic, she doesn't listen. So now Norman Bates, because he is a psycho, decides, you know what, I'm gonna kill her. But he doesn't want to, so that's why he calls into this radio station, is telling this whole story to try and intervene and fight against his mind. Now, it could be a pretty good story. We're also getting flashbacks, that's why it's called Psycho 4 The Beginning, to what really started this all. And the young Norman Bates is played by Henry Thomas, and I absolutely love Henry Thomas. I told you guys, E.T. is my favorite Steven Spielberg movie. Henry Thomas does a great job in all of the Mike Flanagan films and shows, such as The Haunting of Hill House, and he does a great job in Dr. Sleep as well. So Mike Flanagan has really revamped Henry Thomas's career, but in this movie, playing Norman Bates, Henry Thomas is absolutely god-awful. Like, most of the acting in this movie is just god-awful. They're trying to fill in the gaps, and I just didn't think we needed all the gaps filled in. Some things can just be left ambiguous and open to interpretation and just open to the imagination in general, but they did not want to do that in this movie. And they try and tell you every single thing that led up to Norman Bates and everything that happened in the first Psycho, and that just did not need to be done at all. And this movie is just, it's pretty bad in my opinion. Does it have its moments? Yes, it does. But to me, honestly, it's completely unnecessary. A lot of the scenes are just drawn out just to really fill time, and it just didn't need to exist. Now, it's shot pretty well. It doesn't really feel like a TV movie when you watch it. That's how well it's shot. And Norman Bates, played by Anthony Perkins again for the fourth and final time. He would actually only pass away 2 years later. He does a pretty decent job in this movie. Like I said, the glue that holds it together, because if you would have got somebody to replace him doing an awful job acting like most people, only Anthony Perkins and CCH Pounder do a good job acting in this movie. Everybody else, it's just pretty damn bad if I'm being honest. But it's still worthy of the franchise, I guess. It's still better than the 1998 remake of Psycho done by Gus Van Sant, which just makes absolutely no sense to even exist in this world. Even as an experiment of filmmaking, doesn't make any sense. But the entire Psycho franchise is enjoyable. Overall, in my opinion, definitely Psycho is obviously one of the greatest films ever made, even if you exclude it from the horror genre. Psycho 2 and 3 are definitely products of the 1980s, but should be seen by you. I think you'll really enjoy them, especially Psycho 2 in my opinion. But Psycho 4 and the remake, you don't need to see those in my opinion. But if you do, maybe you want to grab this Psycho 4K box set that just came out from Arrow Video that we're going to talk about right now. But before we dive into that, if you are a fan of 4K Blu-ray reviews, movie reviews, lists, podcasts, and shorts, we try and do them all here on the channel, and nothing would help this channel out more than by you just simply liking this video and subscribing to the channel.
We all go a little mad sometimes.
Anthony Perkins, Psycho.
Well, here it is, the Psycho 4K box set from Arrow Video. Now, this was a Region B UK release only. This did not come out in the United States, but because it's 4K Blu-rays in here, only 4K Blu-rays, by the way, 5 discs, those are region free, so you can get this imported like I did, and I got it imported from Diabolic DVD, and I just absolutely love what they do over there. So if you guys want to get some movies that are out of the region that you live in, definitely check out Diabolic DVD, because that's how I got this Psycho 4K box set, and I just absolutely love it. This is one of the best releases of this year, and it's only priced at, I think, at $66 at the time of its initial release. It's a limited edition run, especially with this hard casing that we're going to talk about right now, and honestly, pictures did not do this justice. I was worried about the packaging of this when I first saw it, mainly because of this slip sleeve on the outside that's supposed to look like a shower curtain, obviously playing into the most famous scene in the original Psycho. And when you pull it off, if you look at it, I mean, it's a fingerprint magnet. But, you know, it's also not really 100% necessary. You really are just here for the hard box underneath, which they did a really good job with. It's the Arrow Video hard casing that you've seen in a lot of their collector's editions. But what they did that really impressed me is when you turn to the side, each of these have their own individual boxes, and you get some reading material. So the first Psycho film on 4K in here is actually the same Psycho 4K scan that was released a few years ago in the original Alfred Hitchcock collection, but you also could have bought it on its own if you wanted to. So there is no difference on that. The only new scans we get in here are Psycho 2, 3, and 4. Psycho 1 is the same scan from a few years ago, so if you've seen that Psycho 4K scan, you already know what it looks like. If you own it, you know, there's probably no reason to get it, but you can only get these all together. So if you want Psycho 2, 3, and 4 on 4K, you have to get this with the original Psycho, which is really cool for people who don't already have Psycho on 4K, but I'm a big Alfred Hitchcock fan, so of course I already have it. So I definitely just wanted to check and make sure everything ran the same, and they did. When I compared them, everything is pretty much the same. The menu is slightly different on this new 4K in comparison to the one on there. It's just got symbols instead of words for the menu system, so that's really the only difference. So the audio is still the same. You still get a DTS X track in there, or a DTS 7.1, whatever one you want to use. It's still available on here, so there really is no difference. So the scans that we're really going to be talking about is Psycho 2, 3, and 4. So all of them are in HDR10. There is no Dolby Vision for any of these, which is understandable. You kind of want to put the same scan over everything. Psycho 2 and 3 have 5.1 tracks that you can switch from. Also, they have looseless tracks. Psycho 4 only has an LCM stereo track, so that's the only track available to you. But Psycho 4 also is 2 discs. You can watch in the original aspect ratio, the TV aspect ratio, because it was a TV movie, or you can watch it with the director wanted you to see it in 1.78 aspect ratio, so that thing is going to fill up your screen. And if I'm being honest, the best 4K in this box set is actually Psycho 4. That 4K looked absolutely gorgeous. It's the most modern of all of these, so that makes all the sense in the world. From what I was able to read, they were using Panasonic 35mm cameras at the time, and it really does show on the screen. It looks absolutely beautiful. It's a shame because Psycho 4 is the worst in the entire box set. Psycho 4 also, the audio is good, but it's not as good as the audio that's in the original Psycho, Psycho 2, or even in Psycho 3 as far as the 4Ks go. Psycho 2 actually probably has the worst 4K scan. It's just very uneven. It's probably due to the low budget at the time and the source material. There's certain outdoor shots that just look completely off and faded, and the color is just unsteady. It's just kind of floating between like colors, and it's like what you would see on a VHS almost. That's how bad it was, and it's only in certain scenes, but for the most part, the 4K is steady. It looks gorgeous. The audio track is really, really good at DTS HD 5.1. It does a damn good job on that. But visually, I've only seen these movies one other time before this, so it's really hard for me to compare what they used to look like. But visually, it's not the greatest 4K I have ever seen for Psycho 2, but to have Psycho 2 on 4K with really good crisp audio, and in my opinion, the second best Psycho film, it's absolutely a good upgrade from what I have seen. And then you also get Psycho 3, which is definitely an improvement visuals-wise over Psycho 2's 4K, but it's not the biggest jump. So I really would say if I was going to rank the visuals in this set, I would go Psycho 4, the original Psycho, Psycho 3, and then Psycho 2. But as far as the film quality goes, we'll go in order of Psycho 1, Psycho 2, Psycho 3, Psycho 4. So if you're looking for visuals, it's a little bit different as far as visual quality goes. Now, audio, I think they're all really good. All the tracks are mixed very, very well. You can set your remote at whatever volume you want, and you don't have to worry about it. So as far as the audio goes, it's all pretty good. And the extras, my God, they loaded up the extras on every single one of these discs, and it's too much to even talk about. That's how much extras are on here. You get extras that were originally released with the Alfred Hitchcock Collection Part 1 on the Psycho 4K disc. Psycho 2 and Psycho 3 have all new extras, new interviews, some featurettes and everything like that. Same thing for Psycho 4. I mean, they loaded it up with extras. If you're a fan of the Psycho franchise, you have so much here to just sink your teeth into. And because the Psycho franchise isn't one of the most popular franchises, they priced this pretty cheap for everything that you get in here. It really is a steal at the starting price of $66, especially when it comes down to the packaging. The packaging is absolutely gorgeous. This is one of my favorite releases of the year, one I'll be revisiting every single year come spooky season, because I do enjoy the Psycho franchise, and I've learned to love now the Psycho sequels. Well, at least Psycho 2 and 3 sequels. Psycho 4 I probably won't be watching again, but every time I watch the original Psycho now, I probably will be watching Psycho 2 and Psycho 3. Just know that Psycho 2, at the very end of that movie, does kind of retcon what they do in the original Psycho, but, we're bringing it to a new generation, so it is understandable, but that might upset some people who haven't seen Psycho 2. But if you do want to check out the entire Psycho franchise, you really can't do any better than this Psycho 4K Blu-ray box set. It's one of the best that I've seen this year, and as far as box sets go, I have to give this one a really high score of 10 out of 10. There really is nothing wrong with this box set. Even when you go inside this, you get poster cards, you get posters, so there's a poster for each and every single one of these films. So if you're a fan of the Psycho franchise and you want to hang up the movie posters or frame them, they come with that too. I really can't give it less than a 10 out of 10. When you get brand new 4K releases from studios like Warner Brothers, they charge $35 or $38 for a steelbook to get this amazing packaging for less than $30 more, and you get 4 films and 5 4K discs. I really can't say a bad thing about it. Arrow Video just knocked this one out of the park. It is one of the best 4K box sets you'll ever get. So if you don't live in the region that is selling this, I highly recommend you seek this out. But if you just want to check out the Psycho franchise and the money is not there right now, I definitely can recommend you checking out the films Psycho, obviously, but Psycho 2 and 3 as well. Maybe steer clear of Psycho 4 unless you really want to see what it's like, but I don't think you're going to really enjoy it that much. But anyway, guys, if you want to continue to support Let's Talk and support me, the best way to do that is by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, getting out in those streets, and telling your friends about us. And we'll be seeing you around.